On this week's episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast, Tyler joins me to talk family time during football season, week one news and fallout, and dynasty and redraft risers and fallers. So without further ado, what is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Chu, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And with me today is a very special guest. When it comes to week one in our Dynasty League, we are bitter rivals, but damn it, do I love talking fatherhood and fantasy football with this guy. Check him out on Twitter at tdaily11. Tyler, how you doing, brother?
Doing good. Enjoyed finally getting the, rather than the practice swings, we got the real McCoy yesterday, so got a lot to talk about and break down and get some takeaways, and interested to get your perspective as well.
Absolutely. And before we jump into that, as I mentioned, talking about the fatherhood parenthood perspective on it, I think ironically I've asked you this question, give or take, many episodes ago, kind of talking about how it's balancing the parenting duties on top of going through football weekend, whether it be college or professional. So how was the process with you going through the weekend, especially when it comes to, if you're someone who tracks, your fantasy players while they're playing, whether you kind of just try and catch up later on in the day and just kind of see where your teams are at, or how do you balance that?
Yeah. So week one, not to, obviously want my daughter to start feeling better, but week one worked out somewhat well in that she was not feeling well, running a bit of a fever yesterday. So took a long nap and was very much lethargic. So we had a very chill first week of the season. Got to just lay around a lot and watch a ton of these games. But overall, I think week to week, you just try to, for me personally, you just try to pick a window that you're going to focus on, whether that's focusing on my Titans or just given the context of the slate where the bulk of the good games are. Yesterday we had it was a little bit more afternoon heavy than it usually is as we move later into the season. I think we had 5, maybe 6 games in the 4:00 slate, which is, I think, a little bit higher than normal. Some weeks we only have as little as 3. Mm-hmm. So, that 1:00, whether you want to go with the beefy slate and really attack red zone, but I try to be in front of the TV for the witching hour from 3 to 4, with Scott Hansen, my guy there on red zone, because everyone loves that hour where, as he says, wins turn to losses and losses turn to wins. So that's really in my opinion, the best time. And I usually try to get in front of a TV at that point. But I have been one to, especially with the advent of things like YouTube TV and mobile streaming and everything, I'm not above, being in Target on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, or Harris Teeter, and having my phone in the little front part of the grocery cart there, kind of propped up, and just keeping an eye down there. So,
yeah, I feel like the evolution of how football can be watched nowadays has tremendously changed how things are when it comes to, Sunday, ideally you're prepping, getting ready for Monday and the week in general, but as a whole, if you can actually have it literally at your fingertips, yeah, you could be at the store, you could be at some sort of event or whatever. And, it's not the most ideal situation compared to sitting down on the couch with some nachos and peace and quiet, which once it's having kids, peace and quiet is likely the furthest thing that you're ever going to get in your life. But it's pretty incredible to actually be able to do that. And then, yeah, I'm trying to think of the last game, a 1:00 or 4:25 game that I got to watch in its entirety, uninterrupted from beginning to end. I don't remember the last one. That includes Panthers games. Yeah. Often I was fixing some drywall on my ceiling on the Sunday Sunday game in the afternoon, and that was more so just so I know I could watch the game later. But there's always something to do. There's always obviously the kid to watch and duties and stuff going around. So red zone and YouTube TV and everything is tremendously beneficial. And obviously, even if it's just tracking the box scores, just to have some semblance of an understanding as to what's going on.
I will say, you brought up an interesting point. I definitely used to be the guy who I was refreshing my fantasy scores every 5 to 10 minutes and just really tracking it throughout. And I can't remember at one point, but I just feel like I had some sort of epiphany. And don't get me wrong, like, it's not that it's a completely set and forget, but like I have been so screwed in certain instances where like I feel like I'm trending so well, and then third or fourth quarter happens and it just goes so far the opposite way, or vice versa, that like I've really made a conscious effort to try to stop putting myself through that roller coaster of emotions. So like yesterday, I was in, as I said, I was in fully locked in for most of the 1 o'clock slate, dozed off for about 30 minutes, woke up in time for the witching hour. I think subconsciously I heard the alarm bells going off, and it was like a literal alarm. But then for the mid-afternoon, for like the 4:30 games and on, kind of just had it on and wasn't really paying attention. And, despite me not watching, Aaron Jones goes off on my team. Austin Eckler goes off. It was like they did not need to be glued to it the entire time for them to be successful, whereas I didn't necessarily buy into that strategy in the past.
So you're not superstitious, but you're a little stitious. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I feel like this was this is only the first week of it, but the first season where this is the most fantasy teams, which dwarfs in comparison, I've learned, to a number of content creators out there that have 20, 30 plus. I have a mere 11, but across Sleeper, Flea Flicker, Yahoo, ESPN, which on there I have to log into 2 different accounts because I got invited by 2 different emails and I just can't seem to switch the 2 over. Ooh. So it's annoying as shit. But I basically have to just make sure I have healthy people in my lineups, because that got pretty close on this week 1 here. And thank you, Rashad Penny. And getting those set and basically just trying to be like more so on Twitter and kind of watching the games, because it's kind of you can really get a pretty good semblance of like what's happening through Twitter. Like watch one game that's maybe the local one if you don't have like Red Zone or anything like that. And you basically find out anyone that's having like, is Ayuk going 8 for 8 with 2 touchdowns and just blowing the top off Pittsburgh's defense. Like you'll see what's going to happen and you'll see clips and everything. But yeah, definitely, like you were saying, specifically with Red Zone and all that, like I see everyone on Twitter with like the quad screen if you're able to just watch everything. And I'm like, this is a fantasy footballer's dream right here. It's just to watch 4 screens and just drink it in.
Yeah, I got goosebumps when I do every year as soon as Scott Hansen jumps onto my TV for the first time. So it's always a long off season, so it was good to see it back on TV.
And back on TV indeed. And yeah, we'll have to go ahead and jump into the FF perspective and talk about some news here. So the FF perspective, of course, we'll talk about a couple of news and notes here from week 1. There's not a possible way that we have enough time to cover everything. So this is just touching on a couple of things that are either player specific or maybe topic specific, covering a couple of different players. So the first one here, this was devastating news to, I'm sure, many fantasy managers, but also just people that generally enjoy football. And it's tough to see someone go through a litany of injuries at this point. But J.K. Dobbins, so he's in his 4th season. This is his contract year after getting his rookie deal, being a second rounder. Tears his Achilles. And I mean, at this point, what does it mean for Dobbins as a player? We've seen the roadmap as recently as seeing Cam Akers and Deonta Foreman come back quicker, but maybe not quite at a full strength 100%. And also, I guess, what does that mean for the Ravens backfield as a whole? What's left behind with the Gus Edwards and the like? So, Tyler, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hate it for this guy, especially because there were talks this offseason, of him essentially trying to hold out for a better deal, but because of his prior injury history, really just had no leverage. I mean, he's not of really no fault of his own. He's just one of those guys who has that tantalizing upside. We saw what he did in college at Ohio State, and just has not been healthy enough to do it in the pros. And so just pretty much an impossible ask to get any semblance of like a strong long-term deal on a second contract. It's hard enough for successful running backs like Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley to do that, let alone somebody like J.K. Dobbins. So I really hate it for the guy, given the context of that situation, and especially given the type of injury. ACLs are one thing, which he's already done that before, but now you pick up the Achilles on top of that. And I listened to a preseason podcast with Adam Levitan from Established to Run, and he had a really strong interview with Stefania Bell from ESPN. She does their injury analysis and everything. And they talked a lot about the Achilles injury. Like you mentioned, Deontay Foreman, Cam Akers. I mean, we saw a guy like Cam Akers come back after 6 months, but he looked really, really like a shell of himself. And Stephania Bell really went into detail about how it's really easy to look like you're trending ahead of schedule on something like an Achilles because, and she went into a lot more depth than I'm prepared to, but essentially the concern is not necessarily the pain and the threshold there, because it's easier to get back in that regard than it might be from an ACL. But the problem they run into is, you think about the tension that's on that Achilles and you come back too soon and essentially you're losing that elasticity. And she used the comparison of like stretching a rubber band. It's never going to get tight again if you stretch it too much too soon. And then that's where you see players lose their explosiveness. So I was a little bit alarmed when I saw, I think it was like Tom Pelissero or one of the mainstay NFL reporters said something about that J.K. Dobbins was wanting to mimic Cam Akers' rehabilitation. It was like, kind of cringed a little bit because it's like, that doesn't really seem like it's the way to go. We saw Deontay Foreman like a little bit more time, sure, whatever that might have impact on you financially, career-wise, but he's still having success. He still has, some semblance of longevity to his career. And I just hope that J.K. Dobbins doesn't try to come back too much, too quickly, too soon. But it does, on the other side of things, provide a certainly an interesting potential landing spot, I think, for a couple of these running backs, like potentially Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette. I mean, when they were free agent, when Zeke Elliott was a free agent, these guys were, I wouldn't say, no one was preying on anybody else's downfall, but this was the situation that those guys were remaining free agents for, was for somebody that's contending for a playoff spot, contending for a division and beyond, to truly need their talent. And I did not have the time to look to see what kind of cap space these teams have. And we've seen the kind of deals that Dalvin Cook and that Zeke Elliott fetched in the market. They weren't great, but, it's better than zero. And those guys, I think, still have run. And, what do we have left in Baltimore? Like Kenyon Drake, Melvin Gordon. I mean, I think, we all are prisoners, or not prisoners, but interested in trying to scrape the barrel sometimes with some of those guys. But like, trust me, I've been down the Kenyon Drake road before. I personally have not been down the Melvin Gordon road before. I think maybe you have, but I'd be much more willing to take a shot on somebody like Uncle Lenny or maybe what's left of Kareem Hunt. So certainly, especially with all the promise with Todd Monken and the new offensive scheme that he's got going there, they looked at times pretty explosive yesterday, but are going to need definitely going to need some help at running back depth. Although Justice Hill, coming out of nowhere, did look pretty solid yesterday. So sorry, I got a little long-winded there.
No. Yeah, that's the biggest thing is, it's tough to see that happen at any point in someone's career, let alone, Dobbins already had a kind of unique ACL situation where it was rookie in 2020, finished off the year strong. 2021 preseason was the ACL injury. And then even coming back in 2022, I think he had another like arthroscopic procedure to kind of clean that up. I guess it wasn't, fully healed, fully clean, whatever. But then came back, seemed to be doing okay. Now he, of course, is learning a new offense with Todd Monken, but expected to be very explosive and great for everybody. Lamar Jackson just gets his deal. You bring in OBJ, you draft Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman seemingly healthy. Like, everything seems to be trending in the right direction for this offense as a whole. And much like in 2022, it was Kenyon Drake coming in and being whatever he can, because that was also Gus Edwards going down with, I believe, an ACL tear as well. And at this point, now we've got seemingly a healthy Gus Bus, Justice Hill, Melvin Gordon being elevated from the practice squad, Keaton Mitchell, who's on the IR actually. So I think he'll be out for another 3 weeks or so. So I have to believe. I feel like Leonard Fournette seems primed for this kind of thing. I feel like if Kenyon Drake can do as well as he did in 2022, I have a hard time believing that Leonard Fournette cannot do. That's the floor. I mean, he has to be doing better than that, because I think we're also seeing how poorly Rachaad White is playing. It's only week 1, but I think we're seeing the Bucs O-line was atrocious. And I think we're now seeing maybe Lombardo Lenny is not washed up. It's what he was running behind. And if he's not going to be rushing behind the Baltimore O-line, it has to be an improvement. And especially with that more wide open offense, hopefully opening up some lanes. And with J.K. Dobbins going down with the Achilles, if it is a Cam Akers timeline and he's going to try and come back within the season or possibly playoffs, I mean, I believe the Ravens are playoff bound. So that could be concerning, like you're saying, that he's going to be eyeing the same Cam Akers treatment. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing for his future. So,
yeah.
Well, on to some more negative news, but no one is physically hurt, just emotionally and spiritually on this one. So week one saw a number of goose eggs. We saw goose eggs dropped by T. Higgins, Drake London, Dallas Goedert, and Chig Okonkwo. And that is not to disparage any of the other goose eggs out there. These are just the most notable ones that are complete shocks that they ended up scoring 0 fantasy points in week one. What do you make of one or all of these as a very bizarre week one in fantasy football?
Yeah, I think, in our group text with Jacob Ridgway, who often people who tune in will certainly know Jacob. I think he brought up a really good point that didn't come to top of mind for me immediately, but has really stuck in my head ever since I read his text was, we just have more and more of these players not participating in the preseason anymore and getting into some semblance of a rhythm. I think we saw a little bit of that even when we were coming off of like the COVID year where there was no preseason and offense is just a little bit rusty. I think it's a lot easier to get out there as a defensive unit. There's more built-in advantages for the defense in terms of being able to, not rely as much on timing and, the much more free movement. You can attack as opposed a little bit more so. And I think overall, we just saw some really clunky offensive work across the board yesterday. I mean, and you look at T. Higgins putting up 0, but his running mate, Jamar Chase, I think had 2 catches for maybe 19 yards or something like that. Joe Burrow was obviously off. I mean, that's the prime example right there of being rusty because, and to no one's fault. I mean, for them, it was an injury to Joe Burrow that prevented the kind of meshing that offense or some of the timing and stuff that they needed. But yeah, overall, I think just kind of a weird day. I mean, you look at even like offenses down, like I don't think Ryan Tannehill played any snaps in the preseason, and Tennessee couldn't put a touchdown up on the board. They put up 5 field goals down there, keeping, beer belly Nick Novak, trying to get him in shape, jogging to and from the sideline. I mean, gosh, that guy must have tacked on 30 pounds in the offseason. Baltimore was outgained by the Texans yesterday, which was super weird. I mean, they covered the spread. They won easily 25-9, but there was just some weird stuff going on. So I'm trying not to put too much stock into it. Trying not to overreact, especially to some of these guys like T. Higgins. I might be a little bit more worried about somebody like Chig Okonkwo because while I still do believe in his situation, like that's a case where we haven't really seen it all the way yet. Whereas like someone with T. Higgins, we have, I'm a little bit more likely to be concerned by Drake London, given, Desmond Ridder looking just really, really bad. And Arthur Smith, it seemingly just wants to run like, he might be running the single wing like Giles High School outside of Blacksburg before it's too long. Cause I don't think that guy has any intention on throwing the ball. So.
Yeah, the big thing was seeing at least these 4 names specifically. T. Higgins blew me away getting 8 targets and coming away with 0. Like that part seems to be just an anomaly right there. And of course, the Bengals offense as a whole was just being terrorized by the Browns, as I think Joe Burrow had not even 90 passing yards. So rough to see that. I now just realized that I guess Irv Smith outproduced T. Higgins. So for all those Irv Smithers out there, eat your heart out. And then to go along with, I mean, you've seen it's Drake London 1 target. That's an anemic passing offense there in Atlanta. Dallas Goedert 1 target also. That one was a bit more surprising, but Philly did end up pulling away with the win there, I believe, against the Patriots. But I don't think it was as pretty as I think many people had hoped the Eagles would show out in the first game. And yet Chig only getting 2 targets. And ironically, I remember looking up, I think Nuke Hopkins had the most targets in the offense. It was double digits, but still not a tremendous amount of yards. And I'm sure that speaks more to Tannehill and the passing aspect of the offense as a whole than it is Chig's inability to say get open or Hopkins's inability to pull down a ball. Because I mean, he was getting targets. It just didn't seem to kind of go the right way. But
I watched a decent amount of that game, as obviously you would expect, and it was timing. I mean, we talk back to that same idea of not playing in the preseason. I mean, there were a couple of times where I really felt like Nuke was visibly frustrated with Ryan Tannehill, almost like, hey, like I came here for this type deal. Like he was obviously trying to feed him the ball, but it was timing wasn't there. I think Tannehill, I know he ended with at least 3 picks. So it was, and a lot of those were forcing it or underthrows, to just a lot of teams did not seem in sync.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, with the preseason, the thought is, maybe, by like week 3, week 4, we're then getting to the point where they've actually had in a couple of games back to back. They're actually seeing some tape and they're actually able to kind of pull it all together. But I forgot who it was, but someone had mentioned on Twitter too that, there are these defenders that are also going to be paid money too. So it's these guys are going out there and playing hard. So sometimes it may speak more to the defensive scheme and the defensive talent going against this offense than it is the offensive talent or the offensive scheme necessarily floundering. I'm sure once that timing and everything for a lot of those teams comes together, might be a different story here. And the third bit of news here, this is more of a transaction free agency kind of a note here. Pulling together 2 different players, 2 wide receivers here. So the Buccaneers did not meet the deadline to re-sign Mike Evans that he had set, his agent, I guess, had set about a week and a half prior to starting the season. And now T. Higgins is also voicing that they, of course, did not come to an extension before the season. And it sounds like they both are looking to test free agency at the end of the 2023 season. So what are your thoughts on that? Is the expectation it might still be a bluff and they will end up probably agreeing to something after the season? Or do you maybe have a guess as to where you'd want them to go or where you think they're going to go?
Yeah, I would like to see Mike Evans get out of Tampa Bay. There were rumors of him possibly getting shopped, and I don't think we ever really saw anything, or I didn't see anything at least concrete as to anybody getting close to a deal. But, we've seen the NFL trade deadline with it being pushed back a little bit now in the modern era. There's been a little bit more activity, and teams have been willing to trade a little bit more towards the deadline, which I think is what the goal was with the NFL, pushing that back a little bit. So whether it's injury, whether it's just some team kind of seeing they might be, we hear baseball is like one of the best examples, like teams like one pitcher away and then they make, a big deal for that playoff push. And I really kind of hope that Mike Evans gets that because just depending on how things shake out with their season and, where they go in the draft and what they're able to get, like he's just a guy that I think could really elevate, he's probably past the 1,000-yard season consistency level at this point in his career. And we've talked about before on this podcast, the big body guys tend to fall off the cliff. It seems like a little bit harder and faster than some of the guys that may have a more versatile skill set. So I'd really like to see him maybe get one more chance at playing with a strong quarterback situation and go into a contender. As far as T. Higgins, it's sad to say, but it's not shocking that they weren't able to get a deal. I mean, it's going to ultimately come up to whether this guy wants to play on a discount and continue to be hooked up with Joe Burrow, or if he wants to go out and get his money. And I'm not going to fault him either way for it, but we've all seen the writing on the wall. I mean, Joe Mixon took a pay cut this offseason just to stay with this team. And, when you have Joe Burrow on a rookie deal, now he got his extension, obviously. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase eventually. Like somebody is not going to fit into this mold. And that's why, I think on one hand, it's probably smart to just not have the negotiations going on during the season. It's like, let's go all in this year, try to win a title. Obviously, they've come super close before, having lost in the Super Bowl and the AFC Championship game another time. So really trying to just make that push for a bowl this year. And then it's going to be on him to, figure out if he wants to stay in Cincy or take a big bag somewhere else.
Yeah, I feel like ever since Jamar Chase entered the fold, it kind of seemed like, this is great for now, but at some point, someone's going to be upset not being the alpha. And I understand you could say the co-alpha, both are doing well, productive. Obviously, if you win Super Bowls, no one's going to care. But at a certain point, it's going to wear itself thin. And, I'd been thinking, certainly once Chase really started to come onto the scene, that it would be very interesting to see Higgins elsewhere. And I think that was even before the rumblings were coming about that this was happening. And, I don't think this is a bluff by any means. I also understand why he wouldn't want to, either side wouldn't want to deal with this during the season. At this point, I mean, he is a younger guy still, so he's still very much, earning that next contract. So it's not as much of a Mike Evans thing where, he's on basically the wrong side of 30, but, he has a a very good track record of being productive and can do well. So even if that's maybe a good annual value for a contract, but shorter, T. Higgins may be looking for a longer one that he can actually probably earn that. But you have to be able to put in one more season of quality play. That won't be happening if Burrow's throwing it for 84 yards in week one. But just to throw out a couple of numbers here, I was looking at Spot Track because they estimate market value for people. It's kind of tough. They do it based on, production and age of similar deals and that kind of thing. So what they had for Higgins was they were guessing it'd be like $22.6 million a year. And that's around the DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown kind of range, which I think is fair. I think probably closer to the DK AJ Brown. And then Mike Evans, they had him actually pegged a little bit higher because they also quote the agent here too. So it's going to be $22.9 million, but they're more quoting Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill. So that's going from 24 to 30 million. No one's getting Tyreek Hill money too soon. But I could definitely see his being maybe an annual value of like around Diggs, but for like a year or two, because I always remind myself that it's all about when you become a free agent, because I remember when it's, the Matt Stafford, when he became like the highest paid quarterback in the league, and that's not to discount his ability and everything like that, but at the time that he got it, I remember people were complaining, come on, like how is he getting paid as like the best quarterback? And it's like, because he's the best quarterback right now that's on the market. It's like you don't find out what someone's market price is until they're on the market. If everybody's contract came due every year, then that'd be a whole different story, and that'd be tremendously interesting. I would like that. But yeah, well, so we've covered some news, and now something I know you're very excited about is to talk risers and fallers, and we are going to cover a bit of both in the dynasty space. We're going to look at a rookie, and then for redraft, it would be a veteran that could also just be a second-year guy. So second year, obviously, or past. So I guess we'll start off with the biggest riser here, and we'll start dynasty. So who is your biggest riser rookie for dynasty?
Yeah, it's got to be Puka Nacua, Matata, if my name is showing up. I don't know if that's going to show up or not, but that's going to be, pretty easy. Obviously 15 targets, over 100 yards. And man, just as a joke, as an aside for anybody who listened to this podcast a year ago, when I very outspokenly dogged the Seattle Seahawks, who then turned around to make the playoffs, I think I very almost appropriately or inappropriately dogged what the Los Angeles Rams are going to be this year. And it's very ironic, that they then turn around and smoke the Seahawks, the same team that honestly looked yesterday like I thought they were going to look a year ago. Yep. So, it's just we'll see what happens when Cooper Kupp comes back in a few weeks. But I mean, it's hard to argue with 15 targets. It's not like the guy took, 6 or 7 targets and was a yak monster or something. I mean, earning targets is as much of a skill as what you do with those targets. So, I mean, for a rookie in his very first, live real NFL action to go out and get 15 targets says something. I mean, really the wide receivers as a whole. I also just, wanted to, I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but Zay Flowers, 10 targets, and Jordan Addison, obviously, I think has to be an honorable mention with what he did too. So really some rookie wide receivers hitting the ground running.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in lockstep with you on that one. I think that was the big takeaway. A number of those receivers doing so well. That's funny with Puka, because, I mean, there were a number of people in the dynasty community he was, one of those later round players that people were just banging the drum for, like, oh, he's no doubt, no question. That's the thing you say about a guy that's a later round pick, that you just blindly say that, and then when it doesn't pan out, like most of the time, you just hope people forget that you say it. But then when you say it now, and then he gets 15 targets in week one, then you're like, do you see? I'm going to victory lap right now. It's like, well, no. Yeah. If we look back at those other guys, and don't get me wrong, the Jalen Dardens and the Mike Strachans, believe me, I've picked some obscure receivers.
I was going to say, you've been down that road before.
Yeah, the victory for me is them landing on an active roster, and most of the time it's practice squads. But yeah, that's, these rookie receivers. I think with Addison specifically, he's someone who stepped in that I think there's maybe some rumblings in the offseason of, is it him or KJ Osborne? With Osborne having been there, he has that connection, and both did well. But I mean, Addison obviously played out pretty well. 4 of 6, 61 yards and a touchdown, not too bad. Zay Flowers, that's been, I feel like with the Ravens, it's now, of course, a new offensive system, and he's settled. He has his contract. They, of course, brought in OBJ, like I said, and now it's Zay Flowers stepping in, and he's the new and the young guy, and he steps in and commands the most targets. And I think that's pretty impressive and pretty indicative of what they think of him in this offense, as he is the focal point. I don't think that he got that many targets by accident. So despite the veteran presence of those other guys, I think that he's going to be the one. And I think once we get a healthy Mark Andrews really out there, it might be a bit of a different story, but it looks like Zay Flowers is wide receiver wise going to be the wide receiver one there. And so let's jump over. So biggest riser for redraft. So this would be a veteran. So could be a second year guy, but anyone on or beyond that point. And there's a number to pick from here. So what are you thinking?
You probably, you might disagree with this because I feel like you were higher on this particular player. I feel like he probably rose for me to the level where I had him to where you probably already had him sitting, was Michael Pittman. There was a guy who people were, I think, a little bit split on his talent and then just as split on his quarterback's talent. One of the most polarizing prospects that I've seen at the quarterback position in quite some time with Anthony Richardson, who I think overall played really, a lot better than I anticipated, and I think potentially than a lot of people anticipated. Sounds like good news on the knee, no structural tears or anything like that. I think they're calling it a bone bruise as of right now, which, it's probably going to come down to a pain tolerance and swelling thing. So hit the ice bath, Anthony Richardson. But back to Michael Pittman, I mean, he was drafted as the ADP wide receiver 33 this year. Finishes the wide, barring what happens tonight, in the Monday night game we're recording this, the game is going on currently, but finishes the wide receiver 7 before Monday Night Football kicked off. So when you're talking about a guy who was drafted outside of the, basically a late wide receiver, mid to late wide receiver 3, that's gave wide receiver 1 production right off the bat. I mean, that's 11 targets, and his quarterback looked a lot more adequate, I think, than I expected. So arrows up on Michael Pittman for me.
I love it. Yeah, I tried to think about it, my perspective of, he's someone who was like, well, I can't keep talking about Michael Pittman. So thank you very much for taking that cue for me there. And I had a number of ones on here, I could talk about, obviously Calvin Ridley. I was tremendously wrong on that. So I can.
It couldn't have risen any higher for me. As you know, I was beating the drum this offseason. So.
And of course, ironically, because I had traded for him while he was suspended and sat on it, traded him. He eventually made his way to your roster, and then he just shat on my face, figuratively speaking, in week 1 in Dynasty.
I don't know if you remember, but he started with me. I drafted him in the inaugural draft, and I got so pissed off when he was taking his mental health break, which, maybe I shouldn't make light of that, but it's awful ironic that it fell right around the time that he was, in his gambling situation. So we'll let somebody else has more information than I do decide what was really going on there. But I got pissed off and dealt him to Fabs. I think then Fabs kicked him to you, or vice versa. I don't know. It was something like maybe I kicked him to you but either way, welcome home, Calvin Ridley. Welcome back to Nib High football.
Love it. Well, I will go with someone who, sadly he was not the highest scorer on his team in week 1, and I'm picking Tony Pollard. That's only because his defense outscored everyone in fantasy. But Tony Pollard, he is someone who, there's enough people that were banging that drum for Tony Pollard all offseason saying he's going to be the RB1 anyway. So you might not be surprised, but in a blowout against the Giants, 14 attempts, 70 yards. So, I mean, he's averaging 5 yards a carry. He got 2 touchdowns rushing, couple of targets. I think that was a pretty impressive start. Of course, he is still coming off that leg injury mid to late last season. So that's nothing to shake a stick at in terms of him coming back, clearly coming back strong. That Dallas offense is as potent as ever it looks to be, although Dallas didn't really need their offense very much against the Giants. But love what Pollard was doing, of course, with not a tremendous amount of, notable depth. Of course, Zeke left, Rico Dowdle won the vicious battle with Malik Davis as the RB2. And then you have Deuce Vaughn in there. But I mean, they both combined for fairly menial snap share there in Dallas. So it's clearly Tony Pollard's backfield, and we'll see how he fares in hopefully a better matchup in week 2. But overall, I think the arrow is trending up for Tony Pollard to finish as a RB1 top 12 once again.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to break some hearts here. So now we're talking biggest fallers. And the dynasty one is always interesting to talk about because it's always, if it's dynasty, it's a rookie that we're looking at here. And, if someone's falling, I tell myself that's when I need to buy them. But it's so
when there's blood in the streets.
So that shows how savvy I am. But Tyler, who is your biggest faller when it comes to dynasty? And that would, of course, be a rookie.
Yeah, similar thoughts because it's hard to really just. And I know you're not asking me to throw somebody out, but it's hard to dock these guys too much. I mean, they're rookies. There's just a lot. I think back to Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota's draft class. And I don't know if you remember as well as I do, but week one, both of those quarterbacks they squared off with each other, Titans versus Bucks. If I remember, I'm pretty sure they played each other and they both went off. And so it was just like, and they went as 1 and 2 in the draft. And it was like, these guys are about to be the future. I was like, the Titans finally found their quarterback after, years of turmoil after the Vince Young saga. And, look where we are today. It's like neither of those guys turned out to be what they are. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt, especially in the context of the dynasty community. But Denzel Mims was a name that came up for me just because this was an opportunity potentially, especially with Jerry Jeudy being out, for him to really smash, I think, and make an impact. I'm not going to – everybody was shocked by Puka's performance, but, even if Mims were to have done half of that, in Jeudy's absence, I would have been like, okay, this guy's – the arrow's continuing to trend up. But otherwise, he got a 27% snap share on a day where the Broncos were missing one of their stud wide receivers. And that snap share was behind Lil Jordan Humphrey and also Brandon Johnson, a 25-year-old rookie out of Central Florida. So, and if anybody had Brandon Johnson out there as a deep sleeper, then that guy is having a great, great day, just in terms of, I guess the potential he showed. But, if I had to pick one player, I'd say Denzel Mims, just because it's kind of scary to see the doors open up a little bit for some potential opportunity and for him to fall behind a couple guys that, Lil Jordan Humphrey, and Brandon Johnson, that's scary to be behind those guys.
So many funny things based on your answer. One, you are haunted so much by Denzel Mims that I think you meant Marvin Mims. But two,
I'm sorry, Marvin Mims. Yeah.
No, but the funnier part was, of all of these other categories, I picked multiple people just to cover. I only put Marvin Mims under the Dynasty Rookie Biggest Faller. I also only noted his 27% snap share behind Lil Jordan Humphrey, who I also completely kept mistyping as Lil Humphrey Jordan, which sounded correct to me, and Brandon Johnson, and I put some obscure reference there. The only thing I added was, and of course, behind another former Saint and Adam Troutman. So it definitely seemed like there's a loyalty, by Sean Payton. I feel like since he's come into Denver, he traded for Adam Troutman. I don't know why. And shat on Greg Dulchis's career or anything that was going to be. Like, he's wholeheartedly leaning into these former Saints guys. I guess Brendan Johnson's technically not a former Saint. He just, I guess, sold his soul to play for Sean Payton. And, that had to have been the chance for Marvin Mims. I mean, when you saw Tim Patrick go down, when you see Jerry Jeudy be out for a couple of weeks, this is the opportunity for a rookie. This is when you see a guy step in and be like, well, you're a rookie, so otherwise you probably wouldn't be getting this chance, but we literally don't have anyone else. All we have is Lil Jordan Humphrey and Brandon Johnson. Yet, both of those guys slide right in front, and, the offense didn't look terrible, but I have a hard time believing that, if that's how it looked there with those two guys, and of course Courtland Sutton leading the charge. What does that mean for Marvin Mims? Certainly, once we actually get Jerry Jeudy coming back as 100% healthy, Marvin Mims is going to be buried at that point. And Sean Payton is, I feel like, not going to give him a chance, and that's just going to further hinder his ability to actually get on the field and have any meaningful snaps. So, any of you Marvin Mims believers out there, it's not looking too good.
Yeah, and just to put the frosting on the cake here, I forgot to add is losing his home favorites week one against an Oakland Raiders team that is really not expected to be very good this year is not exactly the encouraging bounce back that I think we're looking for after what we saw last year in Denver. So, Sean Payton's a good coach. It's a long season. things can certainly turn around and likely will. But man, just a lot of signals pointing down just for that team as a whole, but obviously for Marvin Mims, not Denzel.
Hey, they're all. I
don't even know where Denzel Mims is at right now. So his arrow is also down. Breaking news.
I say he might be on an IR somewhere. So as the arrow continues to trend down, these are the redraft fallers, and that would be the veterans. And I've got a list here. You tear down whoever you need to, and I guarantee I have a couple more left. And you know who one is.
Well, I might not, but I do know that you're gonna. I'm stabbing you in the gut probably with this one, but it's DeAndre Swift for me. I don't want to overreact to week one, but hey, at least I dealt you Kenny G. So you got Kenny Gainwell,
got the whole field,
and we heard all offseason that Kenny Gainwell was leading the backfield, and but this is also a team that put like 4 number 1 running backs on their depth chart, their depth chart. So we don't know how this is going to shake out. There was Rashad Penny was banged up throughout the offseason. There were talks of him potentially starting the season on IR at one point. So he was a healthy scratch yesterday. I don't know how healthy that scratch was. We'll kind of see how that all shakes out. But, 1 carry, 2 targets, and no yards. I mean, was obviously clearly behind Kenny Gainwell. He got out-snapped by him 41-19. And in a game that that the Eagles led most of the way. And maybe that's the lesson to take from this and not overreact to is, DeAndre Swift is not going to be the between the tackles banger. But then again, I did not necessarily see that out of Kenny Gainwell either. I mean, he was the one that was basically getting all his snaps in the 2-minute offense last year, which is where DeAndre Swift really shines. So, yeah, I would be a little bit nervous if I drafted DeAndre Swift, depending on where you got him. Hopefully wherever you did get him, he fell to you a little bit and you're not, you didn't reach and are too heavily invested, but things could turn around. But it definitely got some alarms going off there.
Yeah, I know this is the redraft section, but yeah, Swift I only have him in, of course, the Dynasty League that we're in, where you just shellacked my squad, with my running back room being led by one DeAndre Swift. And that is not to say that I don't have everyone else except Boston Scott that's in that Philly backfield on my roster. But yeah, healthy scratch from Penny, DeAndre Swift making me feel like, I believe it's Charlie Kelly at one point. He's like, I'm broken, dude. I'm broken. Don't remember the episode, but that's how I felt when I saw that stat line. It was just atrocious. Yeah, the offseason stuff with them pumping up Kenny Gainwell, it felt like the dumbest coach speak ever. And again, it could be, switching around week 2, week 3. But we can all hope and dream that this is not the end of DeAndre Swift's fantasy relevancy. They did, of course, I guess when they traded for him, it was like for a 3rd or 4th or something like that. So, I mean,
gosh, I don't even think it was that much. I think it might
5th?
have been like I think it was like a 6th and like a conditional 7th or something. I'll have to go back and look, but it was cheap.
It was palatable. You'd be like, all right, worst case, if we need to stick with Kenny Gainwell, we're going to be fine. Yeah. Well, I hope that turns out better. And instead of dropping a sweet hot deuce on Rashad White's terrible performance, I think I've noted that earlier. What I'm going to mention is Juju Smith-Schuster. So the supposed wide receiver 1 in New England, and finishing with 4 receptions on 7 targets and 33 yards. He was 3rd in snap share behind one Kendrick Bourne getting 91% and Kayshon Boutte getting, funny enough, 69%. Juju had 54% in snap share, and he was only narrowly in front of the 6th-round rookie Demario Douglas. So Mac Jones was a man possessed against Philly, trying to get that team back to a win. They, of course, did not beat Philly. But of the, I think, 54 pass attempts that Mac had, threw 3 touchdowns, 2 of which to Kendrick Bourne. I really didn't see that coming. And of course, in the last, I'd say 2 or so weeks, there was the stuff coming out of people believing that Juju Smith-Schuster's knees were just going to like explode spontaneously at some point, which was the funniest shit to see in a tweet. Because I don't even know in what context that made sense. Like they just thought he was going to be on the field and they were going to blow out of his body. But now I'm actually mildly concerned that they felt more comfortable giving these other guys snaps. Is like, well, no, if we need to win, we're not going to play Juju more. We can't have him on the field. So I guess when they don't need explosivity out of the wide receiver position, that's when he'll be on the field. And I don't know when that's ever a benefit in a football game. So pretty concerned about the prospect of Juju, and kind of like what you were mentioning about DeAndre Swift. For Juju, for redraft, I don't know. The cost probably was not too steep for you to get him, so likely you're able to recover and probably just drop him for a backup running back or something like that. So probably not a big loss there.
Unless your name's Dane Ferguson, you reached for him in the middle of the 7th round. Sorry, Dane, had to do it.
Oh man. Well, let's say round it out here. So we of course got our risers and fallers, but all of this is kind of just summing up week one, just the chaos that is week one every year. I feel like it gets crazier. I'm sure we say that every year, but it sincerely feels crazier each year. So all in all, what do you feel like week one means to you in fantasy and in dynasty as it relates to the rest of the season? Like the impact, or is it more of just it's basically a wash? What does week two show us, and kind of build from there?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of the foundation of the house. And then like, I'm going to see really like weeks 2, 3, and 4. I think it's like, all right, we've seen it with our eyeballs now. We're not speculating off of, oh, well, this guy ran with the 1s in the preseason and this guy only ran with the 2s and so on and so forth. Like now we've seen this, what sticks and what's sticky week over week. So there are certain situations like potentially the Philly backfield where, if we continue to see for multiple weeks Kenny Gainwell leading them in snaps and, share and everything like that, like that's something to obviously pay attention to and act off of. But if we continue to see that situation shake up, like, we're just going to have to probably wait a little bit longer. It might be like a New England backfield years ago where it was just one of those guys is going to have to go down before more of them become relevant. So, it's not something I want to completely throw out, but as I've referenced and alluded to multiple times, I don't want to overreact either. It's like some of these guys were super, super talented and did not do well in week one. So we're not just going to throw out Jamar Chase or, T. Higgins or Joe Burrow or, gosh, I'm trying to think of one person other than the Bengals offense to dog on, but, chig okonkwo, like we're not going to completely throw these guys out, but we have to at least somewhat pay attention to it.
Yeah, I feel like with redraft, you definitely, the sense of urgency is deeper. Of course, you look at it as, all right, it's a percentage of the entirety of the fantasy season, one game at a time. And that's, you get more and more sense of urgency in terms of if I need to cut bait with this guy, I need to cut bait, whether it be a trade or dropping him. But dynasty, kind of like what we were mentioning, we were talking about the rookie fallers. It's looking at it from the standpoint of like, all right, well, maybe it's the time to buy low on this guy because, worst case, he just flames out and hopefully I didn't pay too much for him. So I guess it all depends on if you're looking at it from redraft or dynasty, but the market is always there. Of course, dynasty, there's always you include the picks and it makes things tremendously more interesting. I don't have many more in our league, as of course I've traded most of them away to build. And some call it a powerhouse. I call it an outhouse. So looking forward to 2026 there. But Tyler, I sincerely appreciate you coming on with me and recapping week one. And how about you go ahead and give me the final word, a quote, a cheers, or anything that you got on your mind?
Yeah, I just want to give a quick shout out to my oldest sister, Leah, and my brother-in-law, Andrew, that today is their 13-year wedding anniversary. So obviously love those two, mean a lot to me. I don't have any biological brothers, as you know, but Andrew has been always been someone I looked up to and has had a tremendous impact on my life. And so I just wanted to give them a quick shout out, happy anniversary to them. And really don't think that maybe I would, they've just been a great example of what, a good marriage and true love is. So just want to tip my cap to those two.
Absolutely. Well, shout out to the Williamses.
That's right.
All right, brother. All right, man. Well, hey, to week two.
To week two.
Let's do it. See you, brother.
See you, bud.